Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today is going to be the second of the video series I've been doing where I talk about a champion's design from a mechanical perspective and offer some insight as to how the character either stands apart as an interesting and unique inclusion into League of Legends, especially now that we have so many more characters in the game, or if the character's kit just doesn't end up doing anything unique or interesting from a mechanical perspective. We're going to be talking about Ahri today, which is sort of an interesting character to discuss because Ahri used to be exceedingly popular. Back in Season 2 when I first started playing the game, Ahri was the kind of character that you would see all over the place. Even I played a fair amount of Ahri, and she was just such a fun character to play, and I feel like over time, we've really seen less and less Ahri. This character's really fallen off in terms of an interest perspective, or just really has sort of disappeared as an interesting or mechanically unique character, or in her popularity. And sort of the question for me is why. And today we're going to be talking about a little bit why I think Ahri has fallen off as a popular or very often seen character in League of Legends. Now, Ahri, when she came out, I think, did a lot of things that were very unique for the game at the time. Obviously, this was before a lot of the mobility creep happened, and a lot more mobility was introduced to the game, and a lot more characters were introduced with mobility. So, in that regard, already kind of had a leg up for being a very mobile character at that time. Spirit Rush is the kind of ability that a lot of characters would kill to have that level of mobility, but at the time was very unique to Ahri, especially amongst other mid lane mages. And even Ahri was sort of in an interesting position in regards to mobility, or in regards to her playstyle back in the time, because of how she sort of straddles the gap between assassin and mage. I think at the time, burst mage wasn't really a well-known phenomenon. You were just kind of a mage in general, and the assassin moniker had sort of been applied to a lot of different characters, and was applied to Ahri, but Ahri was also talked about as being a mage, and her balance has kind of shifted her back and forth between the two, with different versions of either the mage taking precedent or the assassin taking precedent. But either way, that sort of a mobile character who can be diving in to assassinate people, or can sort of sit on the back line and just throw spells out off cooldown, was a very unique thing for the game at the time, and still, I think, has her standout today amongst a lot of the other sort of standard mid lane mages that we see, like Syndra or Ryze, or even someone like Azir, who does have mobility, but again, not in the sense that Ahri does. The other thing that made Ahri unique was, of course, Charm, which I think we all knew eventually there were going to be more champions released that had Charms as a CC effect, but it took a long time for them to finally be added to the game. And so for a long period of time, Ahri's Charm was the only Charm in the game. And, I mean, the fact that it is called specifically just Charm is a huge deal, right? Like, we can imagine if there was a champion who had an ability called Stun or Silence, right? Can you imagine, all these other champions, how their mechanical identities might have been slowly chipped away because of all the other stuns and silences that have been added to the game, right? So in that regard, Ahri having an ability literally called Charm sort of says that not only is this the character that first had Charm, but also it does sort of date her to a certain extent, because just a Charm is no longer mechanically unique. We have a lot of other champions that now do Charms, and it's sort of a thing that we know Riot is going to be doing more of this in the future. So in that regard, these are sort of mechanical things that have been slowly chipped away at Ahri. We have a lot more mobile champions in the game now, and we have a lot more of them in the game as well. We also have a lot more champions that have Charms, and I think that that's the biggest reason why Ahri's popularity has sort of fallen off, because in that regard, there's very little that she does now that is, strictly speaking, unique. That being said, though, I think that while her individual abilities may not be particularly unique, I think that there are still a few things that she does interestingly from a mechanical perspective. Number one of which is her sort of playstyle. Even though there are other champions with Charms, even though there are other champions with mobility, Ahri, I think, still stands out as the kind of character that has a very distinct playstyle, right? Ahri is the kind of character that can use her mobility in one of two ways. She can either be dashing towards enemy champions, looking to set up the Charm, looking to just get damage off with her W and with the R itself, in order to really pursue and chase down and kill somebody. Or she can use her mobility a lot more defensively, and she can be kind of a kite mage in the sense that she can hold on to her R and just throw out her long-range skill shots from a distance, and if anyone ever tries to close the gap and actually take care of Ahri, well, they'll find her to be a very slippery target indeed. And I think that sort of makes Ahri an interesting character from a mechanical perspective, because what other mages get to do that? What other mages get to kind of play in this kite mage experience, or in this sort of interesting play pattern where they can be assassins or they can be mages, but they also don't have to choose, and you kind of have to see how they're actually playing and see how they're actually built. In that regard, I feel like Ahri, in general, does that very well, and that's still a thing that keeps her as a very individual champion and a very interesting champion. The other weird thing that Ahri does as well is the true damage on her Q. That's another thing mechanically that she sort of lost. True damage when Ahri came out was a very limited mechanic. Very few champions had access to true damage, and now there's a lot more true damage in the game, which I think is a good thing for the game overall. I really do feel like Riot have embraced it as a tool rather than a cool, unique thing that we only do once or twice, and in that regard, I think it's better mechanically, but that's neither here nor there for Ahri. But the fact that Ahri's orb does true damage is interesting. I almost feel like it was a mistake. And obviously this is talking about a Season 2 champion, which Riot just mass-produced Season 2 champions. They slapped together kits and said, put it out because we have to sell skins, and we have to sell champions, right? So in that regard, I'm not going to, flame Season 2 Riot for, giving a champion an arbitrary ability, but it's interesting that she has true damage because Ahri doesn't come across to me as the kind of champion that is good into tanks, right? Like, she very much so is either I'm going to be playing on the outskirts of a fight and just sort of poking around and saving my mobility for the opportunity to either run away or go super deep. And in that regard, having true damage, and not even percent max health true damage, doesn't do a lot for me. Like, Ahri is either chasing squishies or she's slowly wearing people down from a distance. And I guess in that regard, true damage works, but I would almost much rather have seen it with a damage amp instead of just straight up true damage, because that to me would have felt more interesting and more like what Ahri actually wants to do. It synergizes well, again, with the damage amp she gets on her E, which maybe that makes her a little bit more of a Feast or Famine champion. There's a lot more multiplication in that kit in a similar fashion to Zed, how all of his damage is just amplified. In that regard, if Q was just a higher damage Q, maybe it's a little less interesting from a mechanical perspective, as there are a lot of other kits that have it deals damage on the way out and more damage on the way back in. There are a lot of champions that do that now, and Ahri having true damage on the way back in does sort of set her apart mechanically, but I'm not sure if I entirely like that or not. The other thing that I think is really interesting that Ahri does is, of course, the healing that she gets on her passive, which again I think is something that really helps contribute to her theme of being the sort of kite mage that is totally comfortable being on the outskirts of a fight. She has the ability to sort of go in, press W for the bonus movement speed, get a couple of skill shots off, maybe she takes some damage, maybe she doesn't, but then she fades to the back, she's got her passive proc, so the next time she goes in, she's going to be healing up a little bit, and she can sort of play this very cat and mouse, I'm going to hit you and you can never hit me, and it's going to be really hard to ever pin me down or ever catch me from that perspective. And again, it sort of helps her to have a more unique playstyle than she may have had previously. And so in general, even though there's a lot of things that Ahri does that are now no longer unique, I think that mechanically she still has a lot of really interesting things that she does, and that realistically, I think that her kit hasn't entirely held up. There are a couple of small things, like I've already talked about, the sort of lack of mechanical uniqueness. The W is sort of a weird auto-target spell that you just don't see Riot do anymore, and for good reason. I feel like those abilities are kind of difficult to have interest in, because you just kind of press the button and then hope it targets the people you want it to target, versus a lot of other champions where you have more of a concrete ability to say, this is exactly what I want this ability to do, and it's either going to succeed or fail based on my own merits, as opposed to the ability itself possibly failing on me, right? So in that regard, it's a little bit interesting. But in general, I feel like because of this, there's still a lot of things that Ahri does that make her interesting and make her as a unique character, even though she is a bit on the older side. So those are my thoughts on Ahri, though, so let me know what you guys think of any of this down in the comments section below. Again, if you want to see more of these types of videos, let me know in the comments as well. I would love to talk more about champion mechanical design, so if it's something you guys are digging, let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.